This is Demon Marked, Book 1 of the Venandi Chronicles, an urban paranormal romance series. Written by Sara Snow. Narrated by Selena Salcido and Henry Shader for Hot Ghost Productions. Chapter 8. Georgia. I didn't really trust the map application on my phone, but it had never led me this far astray before. I guess I had some real trust issues. I found myself parked outside what looked like an abandoned factory less than a mile from the docks. This neighborhood wasn't some chic warehouse district with gentrified industrial buildings transformed into pricey lofts for urban executives. It was a forgotten wasteland of empty structures. Its streets, haunted by humanoid forms clad in ragged coats and blankets. I shivered in my car, afraid to leave the little security it offered. This couldn't be the right place. The location matched my electronic map, but the building looked nothing like what I'd imagined. Several stories high, it loomed in the night sky like a ghost ship. Its windows were nailed shut with boards, and its brick walls were decked with graffiti. I double-checked the address on the fancy business card that Carter had given me. It matched my location, but it veered wildly from my expectations. Remembering Carter's elegant coat and the vast array of weapons on his belt, not to mention his haughty attitude, I couldn't believe that he would have anything to do with this scary dump. Unless he wanted to lure me here for some dark and devious reason. I looked up to see a shadowy form in front of my car, leaning on the hood. My headlights captured a figure's sunken eyes and concave cheeks. A living skull under a black hood. The figure raised a bony hand. I sucked in my breath, too terrified to scream. Was this one of those soul eaters wearing yet another disguise? A ghost from a different dimension? A monster with an unspeakable grudge?
Got any spare change, lady?
Shit. I shook my head wildly. I've got nothing. I'm broke. I shouted through the windshield. The old man shook his head in disgust and wandered off into the black chasm between two warehouses. I had a choice, but it was a bleak one. I could get out of the car and make a mad dash for the boarded-up warehouse where the Venandi supposedly lived. Or I could drive off and get lost in this maze of condemned streets. The gas gauge on my car had been dangerously close to the red line before I'd even started, and my phone was beeping a warning that its battery was about to die. I would probably die too if I didn't get the hell out of here. No Olympic sprinter had ever run faster than I did when I jumped out of that car. I headed straight for the board door of the warehouse. That door was the only hint that the warehouse held anything other than empty space, rats, and lost souls. Ornately carved, it boasted an enormous brass knocker shaped like the head of some diabolical creature. I grabbed that knocker and pounded it for dear life. The scream that I'd swallowed earlier now came out in full force. Let me in! Damn it, Carter! Let me in before they kill me! The door swung open. I raised my hand, hoping it would land squarely on Carter's cheek. But it wasn't Carter who greeted me. Before who kills you? The woman standing in the doorway laughed. Her laughter sounded like a smoky bell. Most of the humans around here are too weak and hungry to hurt anybody. They're more scared of you than you are of them. The vampires, on the other hand, can get pretty feisty. She grabbed my raised hand, lowered it gently, and pulled me through the door. "Come on in," she said. "You must be Georgia. I wondered when you'd show up. I'm Olympia, by the way." The first thing I noticed about Olympia, after her sexy laugh, was her hair. The silvery blonde stuff fell in a waterfall of curls all the way to her slim hips. Tendrils framed her cat-shaped face and green eyes. A jeweled ring glittered on her pierced nose. I shrank back into my oversized hoodie and tugged the hem down as low as I could. It was a self-protective gesture that I'd mastered at the age of 13, when I first realized that I had a pair of boobs to hide. Next to Olympia's long, feline form, I felt short and grubby. I had spent my day slaving away at a call center, while she had probably been doing Pilates and tweaking her locks with a curling iron. "Don't worry," Olympia said. She gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, as if she had read my thoughts. "You're just as lovely as Jose said you would be. Those violet eyes of yours are amazing. And I can tell you have a gorgeous figure, even under that baggy sweatshirt." Who the hell is Jose, and how does he know what I look like? "I actually came to see Carter," I said coolly. "He told me to come here. He gave me this card." I held out the business card, which was now damp from the sweat of my palm. Olympia didn't bother to take it. She just laughed again. I couldn't help thinking that with her laugh, her hair, and her endless legs, this woman must get all kinds of action. "Is Carter here?" I repeated. She didn't acknowledge my question, just led me down a wide corridor into the heart of the building. That corridor, with its stone floors and tapestried walls, was bigger than my entire apartment. As I followed Olympia, I snuck glances at the woven tapestries. They were patterned with serpentine mutants sporting wings, forked hooves, and long tails. Looking closer, I could see that they were getting up to all kinds of kinky things, by themselves and with other entities. "Aren't these tapestries fascinating?" Olympia paused to touch the fabric. Chunky silver rings adorned her elegant fingers. "They're ancient, but they still keep us warm on those windy Chicago nights." I personally thought the tapestries were weird and freaky, but I didn't share my opinion with Olympia. I still had no clue who she was, much less whether I could trust her with my thoughts. Not that it mattered, since she seemed to read my mind like a book. "In case you were wondering who I am, I'm one of the Venandi, and a witch," Olympia said, proving my suspicion. "You'll be meeting all of us tonight." We had reached the end of the hall. Another tall, intricately carved door awaited us. She stopped in front of that door for a moment, her hand on the doorknob. "Before we go in, I want you to know something," Olympia said. Her tone had been light and playful before, almost mocking. Now, her voice deepened. Those green eyes were hooded in shadows, her lips etched with lines. Maybe it was the dim light, but she suddenly looked decades older than I thought she was. Her fingers tightened on my arm. "What's that?" I asked. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. In fact, those abandoned streets outside, with their creepy alleys and shattered streetlights, were starting to look pretty good. "Once you get to know us, you'll realize that you were always meant to be here. We're your people, so to speak." Then she laughed, and the crone's mask fell from her face. She was stunning, sexy Olympia again. If I had been startled by the sight of Olympia standing in the doorway of a condemned warehouse, I was even more shocked by what I saw next. The door opened onto a vast, circular room, which was lined with cushioned benches and low-slung chairs. Sconces on the walls held candles that shed warm light across the room. Small tables holding chess sets, books, and antique gauntlets separated the benches and chairs. The floor was padded, like a wrestling ring. A framework of metal beams crisscrossed the room, extending to the ceiling, where they merged into a series of horizontal ladders. Long, knotted ropes dangled from the ladders on the right side of the metal web. The heavy rings on chains hung from the left. In one corner stood a rack lined with dumbbells and kettlebells. Displays of weapons adorned one wall. Swords and axes, maces and antique rifles, and blades of all kinds that I couldn't even name. "What do you think?" Olympia asked. There was pride in her voice. "It's like a CrossFit gym on steroids," I said. Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I'd offended her. Good. The witch deserved a little jab at her ego. Then Olympia chuckled. "It'll be good to have another woman around here for a change." "I agree. The place does reek of testosterone with so many of us males around." A deep voice broke into our conversation. A man stepped forward, as if he'd been hanging back in the shadows. He was tall and lean with shoulder-length black hair and a tanned, slightly weathered face. He smiled with his eyes instead of his mouth, filling me with a sense of warmth. "I'm Kingston," he said. "And you must be Georgia. Carter told me all about you." "Really?" My voice rose to a squeak, and my cheeks flushed. "I only met Carter once, the night he, invited me here." I wasn't sure if I should tell them what happened in my apartment the night Carter burst in and slaughtered the Soul Eater. Had he told them how I'd made things move around the room? Like the paring knife that had stabbed Carter in the arm? My childhood had taught me to never give too much away. You never knew when the slightest bit of extra information might betray you or someone else. "He told me that you're a special young woman, one who needs protection, at least until she can be trained to use her gifts." "I don't need protection. I've been taking care of myself my whole life." "Yes, we can see that," he said gently. "But your life has changed dramatically. Demons will be drawn to you. You've had merely a tiny taste of the kind of trouble they could bring.
You haven't had to protect yourself from the others,"
he replied. "What others?" I asked, although I secretly knew what he was talking about. The Soul Eater was just the beginning of the bizarre adventure that was becoming my life.
"There's plenty of time to talk about the evil beings that lurk beneath the surface of our world. Let me introduce you to a few good beings. And while we're at it, I'll finish the grand tour that Olympia began."
Kingston was probably the only man who could subdue Olympia. The sexy witch kept her mouth shut as we rode the shipping elevator, a relic from the days when the building actually was a warehouse, to the second floor. She wasn't exactly meek around him, but the sass element was toned way down. I couldn't put my finger on the way Kingston made me feel. His eyes were infinitely dark, warm, but sad, and I had trouble meeting his gaze. As the elevator rose slowly, he asked me questions about my job, my apartment, my hobbies. They were the kind of questions you ask to pass time on an elevator ride. But he seemed genuinely interested in the answers.
"Tell me about the tattoo on your wrist,"
he asked.
"Do you like music?"
"I write music," I said proudly, wanting to impress him. "I have this old guitar, and I make up songs for myself. I've been singing and writing songs since I was a kid. It helped me get through a childhood that wasn't exactly magical."
"Sometimes a tough childhood forges a strong woman. Will you play for us sometime?"
"Sure, absolutely. I'd love to." Giddy from his attention, I babbled on about the musicians who influenced me, particularly John Lennon, whose music had kept me sane at the lowest points of my childhood. So much for holding my cards close to my chest. As we left the elevator and entered the second floor, I told Kingston all about the things I loved and cherished most.
"I knew there was a reason Carter thought it was so important to bring you here. Let's meet the rest of the Venandi."
He gave me that smile again, not with his mouth, but with his eyes, which were fixed entirely on me. And I knew what it was that drew me to him. Kingston was the kind of man that fathers were supposed to be. If he was a man, that is. I was beginning to realize that in this new world I had entered, you couldn't take anyone's humanity for granted. If the first floor had been decked out like a CrossFit gym, the second floor looked more like a Four Seasons hotel. Not that I'd ever been to one of those establishments. As my feet sank into the deep, wine-red carpet, I wished I was barefoot so I could wiggle my toes in the softness. The walls were a rich, creamy white, trimmed with gold detail, and the hallways were lit softly by chandeliers. Now I understood why the windows were boarded up, so the outside world couldn't see the luxury within. "It's comfy up here, isn't it?" Olympia asked. "You're going to love spending time with us." "Do you live here?" "No, I don't. I need my own space to work my spells and have one-night stands and shit like that." Now it was my turn to laugh. I couldn't help liking Olympia, even if her beauty made me feel like a hot mess. Kingston led us into a room that definitely reeked of testosterone, but in a good way. The walls were paneled with dark wood, like the inside of a hunting lodge. A wet bar stood in one corner of the room, and a pool table in the middle. Leaning over that table, while gracefully holding a pool cue, was a man who I would have considered hot if I'd been about 10 years older. His head was shaved, and a long, pale scar ran along one cheek.
Eli, this is Georgia. She's come to visit us and learn about what we do.
Eli looked up at me and gave me a curt nod. I guessed that he was in his 40s, but those 4 decades looked damn good on him. He wore jeans and a snug black t-shirt that displayed the carved muscles of his abdomen, chest, and arms. He was ripped, but in a way that showed he worked those muscles for a purpose, not just to look pretty. If anyone made use of the gym downstairs, it was this guy.
Hope you've got a little time then,
he said.
Kingston can be wordy. And this is Jose, our local pole champion,
Kingston said, ignoring Eli's barb.
He was about to beat Eli yet again.
Kingston motioned to a slight, curly-haired boy perched on a stool behind the pool table. The boy's faded blue Converse sneakers dangled a full foot above the floor. I wasn't sure how Jose could beat anyone at pool when he wasn't anywhere near a cue. Then, the boy gave me a shy smile and slid the 8-ball into a corner pocket without laying a finger on it. I froze. Jose and I shared a gift. Only, Jose was much better at controlling it than I was. If I wanted to move things, I had to be royally pissed off. This boy was as cool as a cucumber. I knew you were coming tonight, Jose said. You're the beautiful girl with the long black hair and purple eyes that I saw in my dream. I wrote about you in my notebook, and that made it real. That's why you're here. Jose's face was full of wonder, as if I was some kind of angelic vision, instead of a snarky chick wearing a hoodie who had somehow wandered into this hidden palace. Nice to meet you, Jose. I hope we can be friends. Okay, that's enough masculinity. Olympia clapped her hands together. Time for us girls to go paint our nails and watch a chick flick.
Not yet,
Kingston said.
First, we need to get Georgia something to eat. She looks pale. I'll prepare something delicious while you show her my library.
Olympia groaned and rolled her eyes. Fine. Maybe she'll bore herself to sleep while she's perusing those dusty old books. But food is a good idea, and a glass of wine wouldn't hurt either. How does that sound, Georgia? I gulped. It sounded unreal. For once, I had no smart-ass remark to protect myself from my feelings. In the past 48 hours, I had met a terrifying being who had tried to steal my soul, and people who had shown me more kindness than I'd ever known. But as I walked back to the elevator, encircled by the arms of my new friends, one question haunted me. Where was Carter?